Order. We'll move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Over the last 12 months, Senator Jacinta Price, a proud Indigenous woman, has led calls, Prime Minister, for a Royal Commission into child sexual abuse in Indigenous communities and an audit of spending on Indigenous programs. These calls are supported by many other Indigenous Australians, and as Leader of the Opposition, I've offered to work with the government to implement these measures. Why is the Prime Minister refusing to take these important practical actions to address serious issues facing Indigenous communities?
Order. The Minister for the Environment and Water will cease interjecting, and I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. It is a serious question which the Leader of the Opposition raises, and every member of this House, I would hope, and every member of this Parliament should certainly find child abuse abhorrent. And that's true wherever it occurs. And it doesn't occur in just one group. It doesn't occur in just one place. Tragically, it occurs on a very widespread basis, and we know actually that the statistics tell us that the highest prevalence is actually within families and within people that a child will know, tragically. Now, no one in this place is disputing the seriousness of this issue, but what we won't be doing is agreeing to stunts which are designed to whip up outrage somehow, as if this is a partisan issue. Now, one of the issues affecting children, of course, in Indigenous communities was the issue of the stolen generations, of which there was a Royal Commission. And the Royal Commission, which was we read out into this House, story by story, occurred, and it found that there should be an apology given to the stolen generations, and that's something that almost everyone in this chamber was certainly prepared to do. Everyone was prepared to do. Now, an apology.
Pacific Island Affairs. Order. Members
the
on my left.
apology to children
Order.
that was given to those stolen from their homes was important, because some were also put into institutions where they were abused. And that is a finding of the Royal Commission into institutional child abuse, something that was supported by the Gillard government, a courageous decision taken by Prime Minister Gillard, one that was opposed by many.
Order. The member for Bowman.
And on that, I think of people like my friend Senator Patrick Dodson, who, as a boy, hid in the long grass near Katherine, watching as the welfare officers and police took away his mates. I think of Arnie Pat Anderson, one of the authors of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, who has told stories about hiding children so they didn't get taken away from their families, and in many cases, tragically, something that led
Order. The
to
Prime Minister's
abuse.
time has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Fremantle.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Social Services. How will the Albanese Labor government's paid parental leave legislation deliver extra support for working families?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Fremantle for his question and the work he does in supporting families in his community. Of course, helping families get ahead has been front and centre of our government's agenda. The Albanese government will always look at how we can provide more support for working families. And earlier this year, we implemented legislation to modernise paid parental leave to reflect how Australian families and their needs have evolved over time and how we can best meet them. Our changes, which commenced on the 1st of July, give more families access to the payment, give families more flexibility on how they take leave and make it easier to share care. And today we've taken another significant step forward. This morning I introduced legislation to increase the paid parental leave scheme to 6 months by 2026. From July 24, we will add an extra 2 weeks a year, delivering the biggest expansion to the scheme since Labor introduced it in 2011. The Albanese government is increasing the amount of support available to families by 6 weeks, with an investment of $1.2 billion over 5 years. That's nearly $5,000 extra help to cover the time off around the birth of the baby and help juggle care and work. Our 26-week scheme will include 4 weeks that are reserved for each parent, which leaves 18 weeks that a parent can choose to share however they wish. Now, our changes will also mean parents can take up to 4 weeks of leave at the same time from the current 2 weeks that is currently available. Now, these changes reflect the expert advice from the Women's Economic Equality Task Force. They strike a very important balance of increasing support to families, make it easier for both parents to take leave, and providing flexibility in how they structure their care arrangements. Not only will our investment help families, but they'll also support participation and productivity over the long term, providing a dividend to the Australian economy. Now, I'm pleased that our reforms have been widely welcomed by gender advocates, employers, unions and, of course, families alike. Of course, Moon from Canberra, a mum of 2, welcomed the changes, saying they would help families immensely. For mothers like Alicia, who has an 11-month-old baby, said these changes would have made it easier to go back to work and continue her career. Mr Speaker, Labor is the party that created paid parental leave and now is the party implementing the scheme's largest expansion. Our reforms are good for mums, dads, children's businesses and the economy.
The call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. On Monday, the Prime Minister said, quote, "I believe that when you make a commitment, including a commitment to Indigenous people, it should be fulfilled." At the Garma Festival last year, the Prime Minister pledged to Indigenous Australians that he would, quote, "work with you in lifting the words off the page through the work of Makarrata, treaty-making and truth-telling." When will this process occur and how much will it cost?
Order. Order. The Minister for the Environment and Water will cease interjecting before ministers begin their answers. Otherwise, action will be taken. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the Deputy Leader for her question, but I'm somewhat confused at how she had that quote, because her Leader of the Opposition said this on the 12th of October. 12th of October, and it is about me, funnily enough, because it's never about anything positive from them, because they've got nothing to say. They've got nothing to say. Oh, wait.
Order. The member for Hume. We're just going to continue to hear the Prime Minister in silence. Thanks.
Mr Speaker, there he was in a hard-hitting interview on 2GB. And he said this: "The Prime Minister's been obsessed with the voice from the day he was elected. Never mentioned it before the last election, I might say." So I'm confused by the question, Mr Speaker, because the Leader of the Opposition has said that we didn't say anything before the election, and now they stand up and they ask a question saying, "Well, you said all this. Why haven't you implemented it?"
Order.
The truth.
The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Deakin. I'd like to hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition in silence. She has the call.
A point of order on relevance, Mr Speaker. How can the Prime Minister's reflection on the opposition be relevant to a question about something he said? Surely a conviction politician like the Prime Minister—
The The Deputy Leader of the Opposition was pushing the envelope there. I think she knows that. Points of order can't be abused. And if any more of that happens today, people won't be warned. They'll just leave. The Prime Minister has the call and be heard in silence.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My point is the contradiction in the question that's being asked by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, which is very different from her leader, to whom she's very loyal, of course, because the Leader of the Opposition has said we didn't mention the Voice before the election campaign. But then they come in here, they say before the referendum, they say, oh, well, you're just too obsessed by the referendum when we're getting on with doing the work that we've done on the economy, on health, on education, on TAFE and everything else. Then after the election, they come in here, after the referendum, and they ask every question on the same thing. On the same thing. On the same thing.
Order. Order.
I concede to the member for Bradfield, who's as interesting today as he was when he was on the Sydney Uni SRC. Who brings such life to this chamber, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister will return to the question. Order.
Brings such life.
Order.
Mr Speaker,
Members
we
on my
said we
left
would have
and
a
right.
referendum. We did. We said we'd respect the outcome of that referendum. We have. We said we'd listen to Indigenous Australians. We will continue to do so. We said that we would make practical difference to improve the lives of Indigenous Australians, and that's precisely what we will do.
Give the call to the honourable member for Cunningham.
My question is to the Treasurer. What are today's job figures and what do they mean for the challenges, obstacles and uncertainty the Australian economy faces?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I appreciate the question from the member for Cunningham, who is an absolute champion for the workers and employers of that beautiful part of Australia in the Gong, Mr Speaker. Today we heard that the unemployment rate has dropped to 3.6% and 6,700 new jobs were created in our economy. These numbers today show that 561,000 jobs have been created under this Albanese Labor government. This means that more jobs have been created under the Albanese government than any other first-term government on record, and we're only halfway through the term, Mr Speaker. Since these monthly records began in 1978, the unemployment rate has had a 3 in front of it only 19 times, and 16 times has been under this Prime Minister and under this government, Mr Speaker. This is another record. Now, today's results show the unemployment rate remained around historic lows, as I said, 3.6, and the participation rate was 66.7, which is near a record high, Mr Speaker. Now, we welcome today's results because they come at a time of serious global economic uncertainty and pressure being felt around the kitchen tables of this country. We know, Mr Speaker, that the global economic environment is difficult with what's happening in China, a war in Europe and now a conflict in the Middle East. We know in our own domestic economy that as a consequence of the interest rate rises which are already in the system, we've seen consumption slow, we've seen retail slow. And most important of all, Mr Speaker, we know that Australians are under pressure. And that is why the primary focus of this government is rolling out $23 billion in cost of living relief for Australians who are doing it tough, Mr Speaker. And we know that a really important part of being there for people doing it tough is to make sure that we are creating good jobs and that people are being paid a decent wage. And that's why what the Skills Minister and the Prime Minister announced this week is so important, because better training equals better pay. And that's a central part of our employment white paper, Mr Speaker. We know that a good job is central, and that's why it's such an important part of our plans to take some of the edge off these cost of living pressures. Mr Speaker, the government is working for Australia, and as a consequence of that, more Australians are working. And we've seen that in the numbers today. Under the Albanese government, despite all of the challenges coming at us in the economy and from around the world, more people are in work than ever before. Workplace participation near record highs, wages growing at the fastest rate in around a decade, and more jobs have already been created under this government than any other government on foot.
I'm going to give the call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Thank you, Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. This morning, the Times of Israel reported the Foreign Minister of Israel as saying that at the end of this war, quote, "the territory of Gaza will also decrease." Prime Minister, given that Israel's bombing, siege and invasion of Gaza is not only collectively punishing millions and killing thousands of civilians, but also reportedly aims to permanently seize Palestinian territory, will the Labor government now oppose the invasion of Gaza?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I stand by the motion that was carried in this parliament on Monday. The motion that's carried in this parliament on Monday unequivocally condemned the attack on Israel by Hamas. It then went on to say that Israel does have a right to defend itself, and we stand by that. It condemned anti-Semitism and recognised that generations of Jewish people have been subjected to the hateful prejudice. It went on to say, importantly, that this parliament supports justice and freedom for Israelis and Palestinians alike. It acknowledged as well the devastating loss of Israeli and Palestinian life, and that innocent civilians on all sides were suffering as a result of the attacks by Hamas and the subsequent conflict. It reiterated Australia's consistent position in all contexts is to call for the protection of civilian lives and the observance of international law. We have seen, tragically, we saw the result, the consequences of, well, we saw some of it, of course, not all, but we saw the tragic consequences of Hamas's decision to cross into Israel and to murder young people attending a concert. We know that people were taken hostage and taken back into Gaza. We know as well that there has been tragic consequences for Palestinian civilians, and we mourn every single life that is lost, whether it's Israeli or Palestinian. The children who have been killed, the families torn apart. There is widespread suffering. There is no question about that. And I have long advocated a two-state solution where both Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace and security. That remains my position today. It has certainly been the position of my party for a long period of time. These issues are complex. We know as well that part of my government's responsibility we take really seriously is to...
Extension's been moved by the Leader of the Opposition. All those in opinion say aye. Against no, I think the ayes have it.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition. We know, and we've received briefings on an ongoing basis about the need to remain calm, to be careful about our language, to ensure that communities here that are feeling hurt, are feeling scared, both people who have a position in the Jewish community, but also in the Islamic community and the Palestinian community as well, feeling under siege at the moment. And it's important we reach out to them. And that is what my government is doing. My government has had ongoing meetings of appropriate, not just security advice about the conflict, but as well, in addition to that, have reached out to the community. I've spoken to both Jewish leaders and leaders of the Palestinian community and of the Islamic community about how we can maintain community harmony here. And I congratulate all those members on all sides I know who are doing the same thing. We announced, of course, $50 million I spoke about, but there is more that we have determined on as well.
Has concluded.
We will continue to do that, and I recognise the important role that members here are playing with their respective communities. We need to make sure that Australia remains what I regard as a microcosm for the world, one that shows that people of different faiths, of different backgrounds, can live together enriched by our diversity. There's no place for hate here. There's no place for anti-Semitism, as there's no place for Islamophobia in this country. And my government will continue to work constructively with everyone, not just in this chamber, but in those communities as well, to make sure we achieve that outcome.
Give the call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government continuing to provide cost of living relief to Australians, and what measures are being rolled out in the coming months?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. And of course our number one priority continues to be easing the cost of living pressures which are on families. And the news today that we've created some 561,000 jobs since we came to office, a record for any new government, is a part of our objective.
Member for New England.
The figure of 3.6% unemployment is very welcome. As the Treasurer just said, there's only been 19 times since records began where unemployment has had a 3 in front, and 16 of them have been under this current government. But we're not just about supporting the creation of jobs, we're also about getting wages up. There's nowhere we did that where it's more important than providing for a pay rise for aged care workers and the increasing in the minimum wage that we supported. In the first 18 months, we've delivered some $23 billion in measures to take pressure off Australians through cheaper childcare, increased rent assistance, boosting job seeker and single parenting payment, fee-free TAFE, building more affordable homes, and our energy bill relief plan. In addition to that, today we've introduced legislation for paid parental leave to be expanded to 6 months. More generous and more flexible, good for families, good for kids, good for our economy. In less than 2 weeks, the next step in our plan to strengthen Medicare kicks in, tripling the bulk billing incentive, helping 11 million Australians see a doctor for free. This historic strengthening of Medicare comes on top of the cheaper medicines plan that we've put in place. Now, between January and September, the cheaper plan that we put in place have saved Australians $180 million on 16 million scripts, making an enormous difference. And on November 1 will be an important day as well, with that tripling of the bulk billing incentive. Now, while we've been doing all of these positive measures, those opposite have continued to just say no to everything, opposing every action we've taken, nothing positive to offer the country. but we are not deterred.
Members on my
We
left.
continue to engage. We continue to engage by ensuring that Australians are looked after in what are very turbulent international economic circumstances. But we will continue each and every day to work for Australia to make a positive difference.
Give the call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. After less than 2 months in office, the Prime Minister unveiled a referendum question for the Voice.
Order.
However, in 18 months, the Prime Minister has failed to deliver the promised reduction in energy prices, failed to deliver the promise of cheaper mortgages and failed to deliver the promise of real wages growth. Why did the Prime Minister prioritise a divisive referendum over Australians struggling with the cost of living?
Order. The Minister for Pacific Island Affairs, if he continues with that, he will be warned. He won't be here for the remainder of question time. Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, the Shadow Treasurer once again stands up. On the day that employment figures are out,
Order.
you might think there'd be a question based upon employment or the economy. But once again, no. He speaks about priorities and what we have had.
Order.
Well, I'll tell you what our priorities have been, which is what the question goes to. The first priority of any Labor government will always be the creation of jobs, secure jobs. And that's why the creation of more jobs already, we're not halfway through our first term yet, more jobs created within our first half of our first term than any previous government has ever been responsible for the creation of, is something that we're very proud of. And if you compare that, 3.6% in September 2023. The participation rate is 66.7%, just down from the highest ever rate that was produced under us as well. The gender pay gap is 13%, a record low.
Order.
The number of women employed full-time is 3.8 million, a record. Manufacturing jobs, 948,300. The long-term unemployed figures have been reduced by 30,000. Industrial disputes from 128,000 in the last quarter when they held office, down to 10,200. And of course, inflation, which was the highest ever in any quarter in decades under them, 2.1% the March quarter of 2022. The last figures were 0.8%.
Order.
Annual wage growth, 3.6% compared to 2.4%. Wholesale electricity prices were $264 under them, now $63. Gas prices under them, $31 under us, $8.97. And of course, the humdinger, the deficit, $78 billion under them, a $22 billion surplus under us.
Order. Far too much noise on my left. The member for Barker and the member for Hume. Just going to stop them interjecting any more, if that's possible. Order. The member for Lingiari is warned. The member for Hawke has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. The Nixon report identified numerous instances of exploitation and abuse enabled by a broken migration system. What kinds of abuse have been enabled by the failure of the system?
The call to the Minister for Home Affairs and the Minister for Cyber Security.
Thank you, Speaker, and could I thank the member for Hawke for his question and for his brilliant advocacy for his local community. Speaker, I've talked to the House a number of times this week about the horrific exploitation and abuse that was allowed to occur after the opposition leader ignored report after report into failures into our migration system while he was the responsible minister. And the member asked for some examples of this.
Order.
Our border protection agencies recently identified a criminal syndicate that operated a network of brothels. They were recruiting and employing vulnerable foreign nationals who entered Australia under false information. The syndicate in this case controlled the workers through debt bondage and intimidation. The behaviour was highly abusive, Speaker, essentially modern slavery happening right here in our country. Another investigation identified a human trafficking ring that was bringing sex workers to Australia using professionally produced bogus documents. These are just a couple of examples of organised crime targeting vulnerable people and facilitated by failures the opposition leader oversaw on his broken migration system. Speaker, one of the central aspects of our government's response to these challenges is Operation Inglenook. Inglenook is an ABF-led multi-agency task force which has stopped both of the criminal enterprises that I talked about today. So in the case of the brothel network, for example, when the syndicate head, his partner and a key recruiter travelled offshore, their visas were cancelled, preventing them from ever returning to Australia again. Operation Inglenook has had fantastic success, Speaker. 83 people have been refused clearance at Australian airports and 45 have had their visas cancelled offshore, which has prevented their arrival into Australia. Speaker, managing our borders is a very complex task and our government is committed to building and maintaining a proper system of border control, a system that was laid to waste by the Leader of the Opposition. So we've built up resourcing for this system. We've reorganised our department to focus on these problems and the results have been outstanding. Now, the approach of the Leader of the Opposition was very different. We know, Speaker, that he likes to talk a big game. He likes to beat his chest and he likes to say that he's tough on crime.
The Minister will pause. I want to hear... Minister will just resume his seat for a moment. I just want to hear from the order. The Minister for Pacific Island Affairs and the Minister for Climate Change will cease interjecting immediately, so I can hear from the point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, the standing order is very clear. The Minister is entitled to be asked and to speak about matters that she is responsible for as a minister. She's not entitled to engage in a historical trawling through things that happened many years before she assumed ministerial responsibility.
Order. I just want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Thank you, Speaker. Well, to the point of order, the Minister is clearly responsible for implementing the findings of the Nixon report. And whether they like it or not, those opposite are going to have to hear more about what our government intends to do in cleaning up the Leader of the Opposition's mess.
Order. I just want to ask the Minister to return to the question. It was specific around what kinds of abuse the report has revealed. So she's entitled to do some compare and contrast, but her whole answer can't just be about what the former government did. So I just want to bring her back to the question.
Thank you, Speaker. And I think I've spoken to some of the instances of abuse and exploitation that the Nixon Review very clearly articulated. The Nixon Review also very clearly articulated the root causes of that problem, Speaker. And the root cause of that problem was an opposition leader who was minister at the time. And what he did was talk a big game, go around the country pretending he's tough on borders.
Minister will pause. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, the standing orders are very clear. Standing Order 90, all imputations of improper motives to a member and all personal reflections on other members should be considered highly disorderly. This minister has been breaching that standing order repeatedly and she ought to be brought back to compliance with the standing orders.
I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the Manager of Opposition Business confuses incompetence with improper motive.
Order. I'll take action. The Leader of the House needs to state on the point of order, not give a comment. Just order to assist the House. Order. I'm just going to ask the minister to return back to the question so she can conclude her answer. And if she continues down that line again, she'll be sat down.
Speaker, I support what the Manager of Government Business has said there. No one is denying that the Leader of the Opposition may believe what he's saying. He wasn't too hard on the borders. He wasn't too soft on the borders. He was just plain incompetent.
Give the call to the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Can the minister inform the House how many visas she has cancelled under Section 501 of the Migration Act and then deported since she became the minister last year?
Give the call. Order. Member for Herbert. Give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Cyber Security.
Thank you so much, Speaker. And I think the opposition is really leading with their chin when we have just had a report that shows totally shambolic management of that system by those opposite.
Order. 12 seconds. The Minister. Order. Members on my right. The Minister. Yeah. All right. The Minister will pause. The Treasurer will cease interjecting. Members on my right, the member for Bendigo, the member for Hume. Just before I call the member for Wannon, you will definitely get the call, I promise you. We're 12 seconds in. We're 12 seconds into the answer to the question, so I'm not sure what the point of order will be, but I'll listen to the member for Wannon, and he'll need to state the point of order, not give a statement or give his comment.
It's relevant, Speaker, and I just wanted to give the minister a bit of time to look at her.
Order. I'm feeling generous today. The Minister for Home Affairs is 12 seconds to the answer. She's going to be heard in silence. There's only been one point of order taken. There won't be another one. The Minister for Home Affairs has the call. Order. The Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, the number of cancellations performed by ministers in our government in the time we have been in government, that is personal cancellations by the ministers, is more than those cancelled in the last 2 years of this government. And Speaker,
Order.
Speaker, the number of
members on my left. The Leader of the Nationals is warned.
Speaker, the number of Section 501 cancellations is broadly consistent across the last few years between our government and the last government.
Order.
I know. It's tough to hear. It really was incompetence, guys. It really was just sheer incompetence. Speaker, and I just encourage the opposition to just consider that there are...
Order. Members on my left. The member for Groom.
Yeah. I'd encourage the opposition to consider that there are good and bad ways to manage their borders. One of the things that we're really focused on is making sure that instead of having to rely consistently on deportations, that we are actually stopping people from coming into the country to begin with. And what you'll see is that we have had very strong success in using the better networks that I've described to the parliament to prevent criminal syndicates from coming in, to prevent people who've got fraudulent documents from coming in, and that is the approach that we're taking. And I just say to the more general point, Speaker, it is a little bit outrageous for the opposition to come in and make these aspersions about the government. And I would just say we have just received a report, a shocking report, 44 pages, that is an indictment on the Leader of the Opposition's record. And I'd say to you, Speaker, whatever one may think about me and whatever one may say about me, one thing I am not is a hypocrite. I am not a hypocrite. And what we saw is that for the last few years, we had the Leader of the Opposition walking around this country, beating his chest, puffing himself up, telling us all what a puff guy he was. And instead, he
Order.
was cutting immigration
The
compliance
Minister-
numbers in half.
The Minister will pause. Has the Minister concluded her answer? The Manager on another point of order.
The point of order again is on reflections on a member. We have been seeing the same tactic from this minister all week. She takes a report and then she goes from that to a series of offensive reflections, and she should not be permitted to do it. It is a breach of the standing
The member will
orders.
resume his seat. Yeah. The Minister for Veterans Affairs will cease interjecting. The Leader of the House, the Deputy Leader of the House.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. To the point of order. The Manager of Opposition Business is having difficulty because other members of his front bench are jumping on relevance within 12 or 13 seconds of an answer starting. So instead he's falling back on this idea that there's some improper motive. The Leader of the Opposition knows if he wants to make a personal statement and contest the clear facts that the Minister is putting to the chamber, he can do it after question time.
Order. Just going to ask the Minister to make sure she's not reflecting on members and keep her answers relevant to the question.
So, Speaker,
Order.
let's review where we are in this debate. We have just had a 44-page indictment given to our government of the record of the opposition leader running this system. What that report shows us is that because of the failures of the Leader of the Opposition, we have had widespread instances of sexual abuse, of human trafficking, of the exploitation of workers around our country. Now, Speaker, this is objectionable on its own, but what makes it twice as bad is the fact that the person sitting opposite me tried to build a public reputation on a complete falsehood. And the truth is that what this report shows not only that we have a broken migration system, but that the opposition leader is 100% a complete fraud.
When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Solomon.
My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government working for Australia by strengthening Medicare after a decade of cuts and neglect? And why is this so important?
The call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker. I thank the member for Solomon, the terrific member for Solomon, for his question and for trumpeting the benefits of the opening of the Palmerston Medicare Urgent Care Clinic that opened earlier this month. I was delighted to read the front page of that unique Australian daily, the NT News. Not a crocodile to be seen on that front page. It was filled with the headline, "Clinics ease weight pains, bulk billing options for urgent care." And a little bit later, I was with the member for Lingiari celebrating the announcement that Congress would operate the urgent care clinic in Alice Springs at the Northside Clinic, which will make a real difference to that community as well. The Palmerston Clinic, Mr Speaker, is now one of 30 clinics operating right through Australia 7 days a week, extended hours, allowing patients to walk in who need urgent care for non-life-threatening emergencies. And already, those 30 have delivered tens of thousands of services. 1 in 3 of those services have been delivered to kids under the age of 15, taken there by their parents when they fall off a skateboard, fall off a swing or get a deep cut, instead of having to take them to the local hospital emergency department. 1 in 3 of the services being delivered on weekends when we know it is so hard to get a GP nowadays. And of the weekday services, 1 in 5 have been delivered after 6 p.m. Again, we all know how hard it is to get a GP after hours. This is already, Mr Speaker, making it easier to see a doctor when and where you need it in the community, and importantly, right across the country, taking pressure off our hospital emergency departments, including the Palmerston Regional Hospital in the member for Solomon's electorate. But most importantly, perhaps, Mr Speaker, these services, every single one of them, are fully bulk billed, free of charge, because for this side of the parliament, for the Labor Party, bulk billing is the beating heart of Medicare, and we know it has been in decline over the last several years after a 6-year Medicare rebate freeze initiated by the Leader of the Opposition, which is why the centrepiece of our budget this year was the biggest ever investment in bulk billing, tripling the bulk billing incentive, which comes into effect in less than 2 weeks' time. For a general practice in Palmerston, an MM2 area, that will mean the income to a doctor for a standard level B GP consultation, the bread and butter of general practice, will go up by almost a half, making it so much easier for pensioners, for kids under the age of 16 and concession card holders to see a doctor when they need it, completely free of charge. We are committed, Mr Speaker, to doing the hard work, working for Australians to strengthen Medicare.
Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister stand by his claim that no member or members of the referendum working group ever suggested to him or his office that the referendum be delayed to a date later than 14 October?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister. The member for Bruce is warned.
Well, that hasn't been my claim, Mr Speaker. What I said was I was asked, did anyone from the referendum working group ever say that to me? And I answered no. Just a short time ago, the Higher Education Support Amendment Bill 2023 passed the Senate. Good thing. And a short time ago as well, in the other place, the Coalition stood next to Pauline Hanson to vote against a measure that will help Indigenous kids go to uni. So not only are they not prepared to support a position that was put to the former government, not to us, put to the former government in 2017 for assistance to be given to the request Indigenous recognition in our Constitution through a voice to Parliament. They decided, in spite of the appointment of the member for Barara as the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs and the Shadow Attorney-General, the two portfolios that relate to this, someone who had been engaged in this issue as far back at least as 2012, a man of principle, someone who had been to places like Garma and sat down with Indigenous Australians. They made a decision to walk away from that bipartisanship, and that's why Ken Wyatt, another man of integrity, has walked away from their party. Because I got asked a question the other day about truth in political advertising. Well, I'll tell you what the biggest breach in this country is of political advertising. That's the name Liberal next to their name. That's right. Because they are a reactionary party who never know what they're for. They just stand what they are against. Those opposite. And there was once a time where people who called themselves moderates, who had, in the case of the member for Bradfield, held two forums, one for the yes and one for the no, telling people, one group of people who's in favour of yes, another group of people who's in favour of no. That's what went on. That's the sort of conviction politics that we see from those opposite, led by the Leader of the Opposition. Well, we're getting on with delivering practical differences like in health, delivering dialysis units, increasing the number of Indigenous health workers and practitioners, new and upgraded health clinics. In education, that legislation about opening up opportunities for Indigenous kids is one of the things that we're doing, as well as making early childhood education and care more accessible for Indigenous families.
The call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. What changes has the Albanese Labor government made to reduce the cost of living pressures and ensure that broadband services remain affordable?
Give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, this is an important week for customers of the National Broadband Network, with the decision by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission to accept NBN Co's special access undertaking. The SAU provides the foundation for regulating pricing on the NBN, and the ACCC's approval will mean broadband access remains affordable and that NBN Co remains a commercially viable business that can meet Australia's evolving connectivity needs. As the ACCC noted, it is satisfied that NBN Co's SAU variation proposal promotes the long-term interests of Australians. Mr Speaker, this is the most significant reset of the regulatory framework for a decade. The changes we made followed the failed attempt by the former coalition government to push through their SAU before the last election, which would have allowed price increases of inflation plus 3% a year on some products, which had no prospect of acceptance by the ACCC. And you might ask, Mr Speaker, well, why was that? Well, that flawed proposal was the first step in the Coalition's plan to privatise the NBN rather than focus on the interests of Australians. In contrast, one of the first steps I took as Minister, along with the Minister for Finance, was to support the withdrawal of this cynical Coalition proposal and to consult properly with the industry and with consumer groups to get a better outcome. Mr Speaker, the Albanese government is working for Australia to help with cost of living pressures, and the revised SAU will deliver greater price stability, keeping prices in line with inflation and protecting consumers from unexpected price hikes on their telco bills. This new SAU will also support the provision of a new basic voice and data service at around half the price of NBN Co's existing entry-level broadband offer. The NBN has reshaped our economy, delivering productivity benefits to businesses big and small, in the cities and the regions through faster services, access to more markets and enabling flexible working. A recent survey found NBN users save over 2 hours per week and $2,580 per year in avoided costs by conducting their activities over the internet. And with the ACCC's decision, Mr Speaker, we have established a long-term regulatory framework which will operate until 2040. I thank the ACCC, NBN Co, the industry and consumer groups for their extensive engagement in the long-term interests of all Australians. Mr Speaker, the NBN is a great Labor initiative, and after 9 wasted years under those opposite, we have got it back on track.
The call to the honourable member for Mackellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for the Environment. Organisations like the Surfrider Foundation, Surfers for Climate Action and the World Surf League are working hard to reduce plastic on our beaches and in our oceans. What is your government doing to reduce pollution in our waterways? Thank you.
The call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Mackellar for that terrific question, because if we don't do something much better on ocean plastics, by 2050 plastics in our ocean will weigh more than fish in our ocean. This is absolutely something that the government is determined to act on in a number of different ways. In the first instance, by stronger systems, reducing the use of plastic, increasing recycling opportunities, and of course by getting existing plastics out of our oceans through terrific programs, for example using Indigenous rangers to pull ghost nets out of the ocean. We know that ghost nets are effectively industrial-sized killing machines, capturing dugongs and sharks and turtles and other marine creatures and drowning them. So just on the reforms to plastic waste, the use of plastic in Australia has nearly doubled. Between 2010 and 2021, we went from 2.6 million tonnes of plastic, almost doubling the plastic that we're using. That's at a time when those opposite had set very ambitious targets on reducing plastic use, but never achieved any of them. So by reforming packaging regulation, we'll be able to reduce the use of plastic in the first place, but we'll also be able to make sure that when we do use plastic, we choose the sorts of plastics that can be recycled, more effectively—
Minister will just pause for a moment. Just hold her horses for a sec. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has been interjecting constantly throughout this answer. Non-stop. No one else has been, but constantly throughout this answer. I'm just going to ask her to leave the chamber under 94A. Order. Order. The Minister will return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I will. So we need to make sure that the use of plastic is reduced in the first place by redesigning the sort of packaging that we're using. We need to use less problematic types of plastic so that we can more easily recycle any plastic we do use, with fewer problematic additives as well. We know a lot of packaging is covered, for example, in chemicals like PFAS that mean that it can't be effectively recycled. Mr Speaker, we're investing in recycling facilities. Together with the states and territories and the private sector, $1 billion extra invested in recycling capacity, which means 1 million extra tonnes can be recycled every year. That's the weight of 19 harbour bridges of rubbish that we are keeping out of landfill because of that investment. As well as being great for the environment, that's fantastic for jobs. There's 3 jobs in recycling for every 1 job in landfill. And, Mr Speaker, Australia's joined the High Ambition Coalition to end plastic pollution. We've been working at the forefront of those treaty negotiations to make sure that our ambition here in Australia is reflected globally with an ambitious—
Order. Call to the honourable member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government working in partnership with the states and territories, employees and employers to build Australia's vocational education and training sector after a wasted decade? And what has been the response to the government's work?
We call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Can I thank the member for Robertson for his question and strong advocacy for the vet sector in his electorate and beyond. It has been an important week, Speaker, for the vet sector. We've ensured a compact for 5 years, providing strategic funding certainty for the sector that needs to supply the skills to our economy. And, of course, it also outlines the significant reforms that need to be undertaken so that the vet sector is fit for purpose. And I'd like to again repeat my appreciation to state and territory governments for their collaborative approach and really to returning to the table after a decade of neglect by those opposite. In doing so, I share with the House the responses to the announcement by the state ministers. The New South Wales Minister for Skills, Steve Wynne, hailed the agreement as a united commitment to train key workers in priority industries and build a robust and scalable skills force. My Victorian counterpart, Gail Tierney, put it well when she said it was particularly pleasing to see the federal government's strong commitment to TAFE, which includes working with states on the establishment of national network TAFE centres of excellence involving partnerships with TAFEs, universities and industry. Minister for Skills in Queensland, Di Farmer, said she was thankful to the Albanese government for recognising the unique training needs of a diverse and decentralised state. The South Australian Premier, Peter Malinauskas, declared this the most significant investment in Skills Australia and in South Australia that has ever been seen, and he went on to say, we are building our workforce and our economy in a way that has never been before. The WA Minister, Simone McGurk, acknowledged that after years of interim agreements, the Cook and Albanese governments achieved something others could not, securing a long-term agreement giving certainty to the vet sector, which is critical for providing skills to the economy. ACT Chief Minister Andrew Barr, who, of course, I'm pleased to say, accompanied the Prime Minister and I and the member for Canberra at the announcement in Canberra this week, said, and I quote, "It's a landmark agreement, one that wasn't easy to arrive at, but there was a willingness from the federal government to work with states and territories, and that is what was absent in previous decades." The Chief Minister, of course, was right.
This is the first national skills agreement in a decade after a decade of neglect by those opposite. A complete failure. It wasn't they couldn't get a national skills agreement, they couldn't get an agreement with any state or any territory in the last government. That's how bad they were, and that's why we've had to work together. Now, I'll be meeting my counterpart ministers in Hobart on the 17th of November, so we implement this agreement because that's what good governments do.
Give the call to the member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm the referendum working group suggested to his Chief of Staff that the referendum be delayed to a date later than the 14th of October?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
No, I can't confirm that. I met with the referendum working group on a number of occasions. We met for 2 days around the Cabinet table, and every member of the referendum working group was completely committed to going forward. And what we've done here is do exactly what we said we would do, which is to have a referendum. I put forward last year, I put forward a timetable that we stuck to, a timetable that said there would be a referendum in the last quarter of this year. I spoke on multiple occasions about it being at a time after the grand finals were held and after the Parliament would vote for a referendum to be held, which the Parliament did in June. Now, I'm not sure what way the member for Page voted in that legislation, but the Leader of the Opposition sat over here and voted for the referendum to go ahead. And voted for the referendum to go ahead, and
Order. The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting.
And under the legislation of how we hold a referendum, there is a time frame for when you can have it. A time frame. You can't put it off and kick it down the can down the road forever. And during the period as well that occurred, I note that the Leader of the Opposition at one stage said, having voted for what the referendum question would be, having voted for that, said that I could just change what the question is. Incredible. That's what he said halfway through. And then in October he was saying that we didn't ever say before the election that we'd have a referendum on the voice.
Are you still here? Order.
I am.
Order. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Accepted responsibility for my actions. I have accepted and respected the outcome of the referendum. What I'm not responsible for is we'll say anything if it fits the convenience of, on a radio interview, we'll say anything at all regardless of its relationship to the truth, such as the idea that we never mentioned before the election that we would hold a referendum on the voice. We held a referendum on the voice. The Australian people had their say. We respect that. We're getting on with the job of making a difference to Indigenous lives. It's a pity that you're still voting against things that would make a difference in this chamber.
I'll give the call. Order. I'll give the call to the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How will the Albanese Labor government's plan to get more renewables into the energy grid set Australia up for the opportunities of the future, and what will it mean for skills and jobs?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
I thank my honourable friend for his question and thank him for his work in his community. He fights for his community at home and here in Canberra as well. And, Mr Speaker, the Albanese government believes in a future made in Australia. That means well-paid jobs, highly skilled jobs, right up and down the supply chain.
Order.
And the most important thing to achieve that is getting the transition to renewable energy right. Take hydrogen as one example, Mr Speaker. Green hydrogen in Australia could produce up to 16,000 jobs, with another 13,000 in construction. And those jobs almost exclusively will be created in Australia's regions. In Australia's great industrial regions like Whyalla, where the Prime Minister was just a few weeks ago announcing a hydrogen hub.
Leader of the Nationals
like the regions I'll be in next week when I'm announcing the next round of hydrogen hub funding on behalf of the Albanese government. Green hydrogen will create not just the opportunity to export renewable energy and to drive Australian industry, but thousands and thousands of jobs. And this, as well as being a great opportunity, is a challenge to train those jobs. We're going to need, for example, Mr Speaker, 32,000 new electricians over the next 7 years. 32,000 sparkies will need to be trained. That's why I was so delighted that the Minister for Skills delivered the Skills Compact this week and increased funding for key priority areas, including jobs related to renewable energy and electrification. A really important step forward in the training system of Australia to make sure we're training for the jobs of the future, and I join with others in congratulating the Minister for Skills in doing so. And of course, Mr Speaker, another key element to Australia's manufacturing future is the importance of cheap and reliable energy supply. And I welcome the new figures today. Encouraging figures from the Australian Energy Regulator today, which show that wholesale prices are now half what they were this time last year. Less than half what they were this time last year. A lot of work still to do, long way to go, but encouraging figures. You would think you'd welcome wholesale energy prices being less than half what they were this time last year. You know why they're less than half what they were this time last year? Two reasons. Solar energy production is way up, 31%, way up, and this government capped coal and gas prices, Mr Speaker. They're the two reasons why wholesale prices are less than half, supported by this side of the House, opposed by those opposite. The Leader of the Opposition says he'll roll it back. He doesn't support the caps on energy prices. He doesn't support renewable energy. He just doesn't get it. What he doesn't understand is that the key to a future made in Australia, good, well-paid jobs, is getting the renewable energy transition right, and that's exactly what this government will continue to do.
The call to the honourable member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Prime Minister. Voters have a right to know who is funding their political candidates. In the last 20 years, 21% of private funding to the major parties has been disclosed.
The member for Curtin will resume her seat for a moment. That is unacceptable. I can't hear the question. The member is entitled and deserves to be heard in silence. If anyone interjects during her question, they will be asked to leave the chamber immediately. I'll ask the member for Curtin to begin her question and for the time to be reset.
Thank you. Voters have a right to know who's funding their political candidates. In the last 20 years, only 21% of private funding to the major parties has been disclosed donations. 47% is listed as undisclosed and 31% is listed as other receipts. So about 4 out of every $5 of private political funding is dark money. In the upcoming electoral reform package, will the government get rid of dark money in politics?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Curtin for her question. I thank her for the work that she does as a member of the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters. The Special Minister of State will be looking carefully at all the recommendations that come forward from JSCEM, including additional comments and proposals which are made by individual members. I know that she has raised this issue with me in meetings, and I know that she has very clear views about it. Some of the views of the member for Curtin align with commitments that we've made to improve transparency and accountability. For example, we have said that we support real-time reporting of political donations and we support reducing the disclosure threshold. We believe that electoral reform should be undertaken in a consultative way and in a bipartisan way that moves forward. And the Special Minister of State will continue to have discussions across the Parliament on these recommendations and reforms ahead of JSCEM's final report, which is expected later this year. I do think that that is important. We had commitments, like other commitments we made before the election. We're a government that fulfils the commitments that we make. And one of those commitments, of course, was for the creation of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. We not only put that in legislation, we passed it, it's now operating. That's what we do. And that compares with what had occurred previously, where governments had been elected with commitments to create anti-corruption commissions and just didn't get around to actually moving the legislation in the parliament, let alone setting them up. We think that, I think overwhelmingly, people who participate in the political process do so from a position of wanting to make a contribution to the nation. And I think people engaging in political parties is a good thing, just like people engaging in community political action is a good thing as well. An active citizenry is an important component of our political democracy here in Australia. We will bear all of that in mind with any legislation that's brought forward. I look forward to continuing to engage with the member for Curtin on this issue, but I encourage her to engage with our Special Minister of State on this issue as well.
Give the call to the honourable member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. How will this week's new skills agreement help address labour shortages for small businesses and build on the government's agenda to support this vital sector?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Corangamite for that question. I know that she, like many people in this House, is excited about the new skills agreement that will unlock billions of dollars for Australian skills, and the agreement was announced obviously by the Prime Minister and the Minister for Skills and Training earlier this week, and it will see the Albanese Labor government invest up to $12.6 billion to expand and transform access to the vocational educational training sector and to support quality training. This investment, of course, is on top of our fee-free TAFE, and we've heard from the Minister for Skills and Training just how successful that has been, and it has been very well received by small businesses across the country, Mr Speaker. It will be transformative for small businesses, this skilling package. As Small Business Minister, I spend a lot of my time talking to small businesses right across the country, and consistently one of the top concerns they raise is about workforce. And as the National Australia Bank reported earlier this year, 1 in 3 small and medium-sized businesses identified labour shortages as a very significant issue. Mr Speaker, we have listened and we're actually acting. Our skills agreement will help ensure that our small businesses, as well as our big businesses, have the workers they need. Importantly, though, with the skills and qualifications that small businesses need. Small businesses are crying out for skilled labour across this country, Mr Speaker, and it's been welcomed by the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who said the agreement, and I quote, has the potential to tackle Australia's crippling shortage of qualified workers. This is the #1 issue that small businesses raised, and we're acting to deliver a more qualified workforce for small businesses right across the country. But it is just one of the ways that our government is supporting small businesses, Mr Speaker. We're also, of course, providing targeted support through the $20,000 instant asset write-off. The Small Business Energy Incentive, $310 million, the additional 20% bonus deduction for energy efficiency improvements for small businesses. And, of course, this is on top of our targeted energy bill relief that we know that small businesses will be receiving, up to $650 for around 1 million small businesses that will be receiving this payment. Of course, something those opposite voted against that support for small businesses, Mr Speaker. We're also investing $23.4 million to help small businesses build their resilience in terms of cyber security and attacks through the new Cyber Wardens program. This will be delivered by the Council of Small Business Organisations and will help small businesses prepare for attacks and understand what type of threats they have. Of course, we've already delivered the $8.6 million to help small businesses adapt and build resilience through digital technology. We'll continue to listen to small businesses and continue to deliver practical support in a targeted way.
Time has concluded. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.